Welcome to Africa is a Planet by Oleng Kingi, a podcast of stories set against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals set in the context of Africa. My name is Oleng.
And my name is Engaisi Peter, joining Oleng to help unpack this second episode of the podcast, broken down into a series of chapters touching on the fourth Sustainable Development Goal set out by the United Nations General Assembly and intended to be achieved by the year 2030. To ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all.
Let us begin.
Africa is a planet. Africa is a planet. Oh, thank you. Africa is a planet.
My 2023 began with a visit to Tanzania. You fly into TZ from Kenya, southeast bound to Dar es Salaam, from Nairobi, and catch an aerial for the gram of Mount Kilimanjaro. On the right side of the propeller-driven tube, sing a psalm for the majesty of a circumference of rock elevated, a piece of earth lifted 5,895 meters off the level of the sea. We fly past this highest point of the land of Africa and into the eastern corridor of the country. I'm taken in by the snaking of the Pangani River, traveling a long way down from the mountain sources of Kilimanjaro and Meru. The morning sun painting the river's body and very open mouth golden as it expresses into the Indian Ocean. This treasure from God has contributed to the country's power grid by way of the Nyumba ya Mungu hydroelectric dam. And this since the 1960s, not long after the territory was constituted into an independent nation. A nation, an entity born and named after a unification between the territory's mainland, then identified as Tanganyika, and one of the oldest continuously inhabited places in Africa, Zanzibar.
Na vile walijaribu kutuambia mapenzi ya mbali wezi bila subira, hisia zangu hadi wazitulia, kwa kweli bado na kuona karuninga.
Tanzania is the most populated African country entirely south of the equator. So it's a good thing that its people are organized around the philosophy of community. A quick study of the People's Coat of Arms shows us how much the idea of working together forms the foundation of the nation's identity. For the sake of collective prosperity, for the sake of stability and peace. And speaking of which, our flight eventually enters the space of the city that was named after the word peace. Sprawling at 1,590 square kilometers, Dar es Salaam becomes our destination. This cosmopolitan abode is home to close to 8 million residents, including my good friend Engaisi, who I invited to the podcast to help me unpack the Tanzanian experience. Starting now, with a couple of introductory notes about this part of the world that she calls home.
Cheche from the islands, habari za leo from the mainland. It is within these borders bound by Kiswahili that our 62 years of existence have taken us from ujamaa to carving out our own space in the capitalist world. On July 1st, 2020, we became a lower middle income country, and the new 1,100 income per capita earned by our people and businesses brought with it a question. What does this mean to the machinga, to the mamantilie, to the genge owner, or the employee in Kariako? And this opened doors to examining our country's socioeconomic future. The lowest 20% of Tanzanians share 6.9% of this new income, while the highest 20% of earners share 48.1% of it. In this wide gap stands another question for me. What can we do about this inequality? 0.4 is my answer. zero point 0.4 is our current human capital index number. It is the skills, knowledge, and experience a Tanzanian child born today can expect to attain by their 18th birthday as a direct result of the value of investments the Tanzanian government puts into health and education. Now, the implications of neglecting this number is best outlined by the World Bank, and they say there is mounting evidence that unless they strengthen their human capital, countries cannot achieve sustained inclusive economic growth, will not have a workforce prepared for the more highly skilled jobs of the future, and will not compete effectively in the global economy. Yet investment in people is often neglected. This is despite many examples of rapid national transformation of human capital, including Singapore, the Republic of Korea, and Ireland, and specific successes in some of the world's poorest countries." End quote. To me, the future of my country depends on our country's attention to education. I'll pause there for now, but I'm excited to come back and dive deeper into this topic about my country to help you gain an appreciation of our way of life, particularly within the context of UN's fourth Sustainable Development Goal.
And it is at this point that I will introduce Engaisi a bit better. The genesis of Engaisi, Peter's life, spanning into her childhood, unfolded in central Tanzania, in a region called Singida. She then went on to trot the globe for several years before settling back home, but this time in Dar, 3 years ago, where she works in the education industry. She enjoys getting her hands dirty with ink, paint, and earth, crafting pottery, poems, paintings, and gardens. Engaisi savors conversations about the subject of work in her own podcast and enjoys swimming, running, and playing volleyball. And with her stepping in from time to time in this adventure to grant us more context on the issues we'll be discussing, I know that this story being shared with you will be in safe hands. So, back to the story.
Na wazaje hii long distance tatupata kama tumepanda nje.
We land at the Julius Nyerere International Airport, my mother and I. You see, this was actually a family trip to visit our Tanzanian family on my father's side. A number of months earlier in 2022, my Tanzanian Luo auntie Vicky, sister to my late father, had passed away. So having finally gotten the chance to, we made a trip out to pay our respects and to condole with my Uncle Edward and my 2 cousins, Kie and Camille. Not long after our trip, my Uncle Edward Malai himself also passed away, making the time we spent together that much more meaningful.